As I tucked him in and said goodnight, my son said to me pleadingly, "Daddy, look under the bed for monsters." And so I did, but under the bed I only found my son shaking and whispering to me, "Daddy, there is something in my bed." It was 9 p.m. and it was time for my son to lie down in bed and go to sleep. He liked his mother or me to accompany him and tuck him in. Sometimes we read a story together, other days we told each other how our day had gone. That night, my wife stayed in the living room finishing some documents for her work, and I was in charge of accompanying the little one to his room. As I covered him tightly with the blankets and said goodnight, my son looked at me with eyes full of fear and pleading. "Daddy, look under the bed for monsters." His words brought a smile to my face, and I lovingly stroked his hair before nodding tenderly. The room was plunged into darkness, save for the dim light of his bedside lamp. I got on my knees, bent over, and looked under the bed. At first, I only saw some toys and stuffed animals, but then I realized that something was moving in the gloom. I got a little closer, and suddenly a cool hand emerged from the darkness. My heart stopped for a moment. It wasn't my son's hand, and I was sure it wasn't a toy. Breathing heavily, I quickly backed away as I stared in horror at the figure beginning to emerge from under the bed. His body was covered in a black, slimy substance that dripped onto the floor in the room. Terror gripped me as I stood paralyzed, unable to scream or move. My son, still curled up in bed, looked at me with a panicked look in his eyes. "Daddy," he whispered, "I'm scared." My thoughts became clouded as I stared in terror at the figure emerging from under the bed. That couldn't be the work of my imagination. Moved by my instinct to protect my little one, I threw myself at the creature. I grabbed it by the arm and violently dragged it to the ground away from my son. It shouted like it was a child, but I didn't let myself be intimidated. I hit it several times, leaving it almost unconscious, and I grabbed my son in my arms. I locked the bedroom door, and without explaining, I told my wife to leave there with us. That wasn't a murderer. It wasn't even human. That creature looked like the devil himself. We went out to the garden and I left my son with my wife, so I came back. Yes, it seems absurd, but I couldn't allow that thing to follow us wherever we went. So I grabbed a can of gasoline and poured it over that demon. From the window, I could see my wife and son watching what I was doing intently from the outside. I lit a match and I dropped it on top of the unconscious body. I saw it. The boy who was next to my wife no longer had the same face. He had become deformed and was laughing grotesquely. I looked down in the moment in which the match was slowly lowering before producing combustion between the fire and the gasoline. I saw how the black viscous layer was spreading and revealed the appearance of that creature. He was my son, my true son. The truth made its way into my mind clearly. I had made a catastrophic mistake. The match finally reached its aim and the gasoline ignited in a furious flame, engulfing my little boy. He began to scream in pain and agony as his little body writhed on the ground. His eyes were filled with tears and terror as he looked at me and he screamed, "Daddy, what have you done?" We continue with a new story. Don't leave yet. My name is Rocío, and I always dreamed of having a little sister. For as long as I can remember, I used to ask Mom and Dad to give me a sister that I could play with and share all my secrets. Finally, one day, my wish came true. My mom gave me the most exciting news of my life. She was gonna have a baby. During the months I waited for her arrival, I couldn't stop imagining everything we would do together. I planned the activities we would enjoy and the stories I would tell her before bed. I was so excited and impatient. I would be an amazing big sister. I was very good at cooking. My family always jokes calling me Chef Rocío because I'm capable of making amazing dishes at my age. And of course, my little sister could also enjoy my talent. When the day finally came and I met Emma in the hospital, it was one of the most exciting moments of my life. She was so small and cute. I looked at her with affection and promised to always take care of her and protect her. However, As time went on, I realized that my life was changing and I hadn't counted on it. Everyone from mom and dad to my grandparents seemed to pay much more attention to the baby than they did to me. I understood that she was small and needed special care, but sometimes I felt forgotten. My mom spent most of her time feeding, changing diapers, and taking care of Emma. Dad was also busy with the baby, helping her sleep and playing with her. My grandparents came to visit, and they also focused on the little girl, holding her in their arms and giving her kisses. Even when my friends came over, they all wanted to see the baby and talk about how pretty she was. Everyone repeated over and over again, "It's so pretty that it makes you want to eat her." At first I was happy for Emma, but over time, jealousy began to grow in me. I missed my parents and I felt ignored. Sometimes I tried hard to get their attention, but they always seemed to be busy with my sister. I felt like I had lost my special place in the family. One day, when I was feeling especially lonely and sad, my mom noticed my mood and took me aside to talk. She explained to me that even though Emma needed a lot of attention, I was still just as important to them. They told me how much they loved me and that they were just trying to make sure the baby was well taken care of, just like they had done for me when I was so little. So I put aside all that tantrum and I decided to be an exemplary girl and make my entire family happy, so that they would love me again as always. I set out to do what I did best, cook. That day, my parents had gone to the supermarket, and soon they would return with my grandparents to eat together. They left Emma sleeping in the room. If she started crying or was very restless, I just had to call them on their cell phone and they would come back right away. So I'm going to cook a delicious soup. I started cutting the vegetables. I had good control and they were super thin, which gave very good results. The most difficult thing was the meat, because that day I had to first bone it and then leave it in pieces. A lot of blood came out, but hey, it's normal. Of course, it was very tender, because when I ran the edge of the knife through the meat, it seemed to fall apart, shortly after my parents and grandparents arrived. I was adjusting the salt in the soup, but it was almost ready. Soon we could sit down to eat. Suddenly, I heard a lot of screams coming from Emma's room. When my parents and grandparents entered the kitchen, they were extremely surprised. I'm sure it was because of the delicious smell of the baby in the soup. Did you see, Emma? You're so pretty that everyone wants to eat you. This is not over. Join us to see a new Halloween story. On the first day of class in 6th grade, I met Jonan. It was his first day at my school, and he barely spoke to anyone until one day we sat together. He told me that his parents had moved to the city to stay with his grandmother, whom he had just met. I liked being his friend, although some thought I was only talking to him out of interest. Well, I haven't told you, Jonan was rich. I knew it because of his clothes, his sneakers, his parents' car. But that didn't matter to me. I had never made any distinction between social classes. We were two kids who had fun together. We soon began spending time together after class. Jonan came to my house almost every weekend. He had told me that he had all the newest consoles on the market and that if I wanted, one day I could go to his house and play. I was anxious, and a few days later, he invited me. That afternoon after school, his father was waiting for us with a car, and I discovered that he was not a very talkative man, because he didn't speak to me during the entire trip. When we approached his house, my eyes widened in surprise. I was expecting a large mansion, but instead there was a normal house. I soon remembered that they were living with their grandmother, so I already had the explanation. His grandmother didn't have to live in luxury. His mother opened the door for us with a smile, but as soon as she saw me, her expression disappeared. My friend introduced me, and the woman quickly told us to go play in the room. Afterwards, she walked away with the father. It was clear that neither of them were happy to see me, perhaps because I wasn't from a rich family like them. A narrow hallway led to the rooms. The first door led to my friend's habitation. It was a room with a lot of superhero toys and decorations. The most amazing thing, he had a giant television in his own room with all the consoles arranged in a row. I was amazed. After showing me all his toys, we started playing. After a while, I needed to go to the toilet. Jonan indicated to me that it was at the end of the hallway. Just as I was about to enter, something caught my attention. There was a room with the door closed where small noises came from. I tried to listen to what they were saying, but then the door flew open. My friend's mother came out and our eyes met. She immediately closed the door behind her, but in that small instant, I could see an old woman laying on a bed with an oxygen mask on her face. The lady looked at me and said, "Your parents must be worried. John and Dad can take you home now." And she walked away to tell her son that it was time for his guest to leave. I was just a kid, but I didn't miss the hint. After another silent ride with my friend's father, he dropped me off at my house. I felt very insulted, and I promised myself that I would never return to that house. Time passed, and I started avoiding John at school too. He understood that I was upset by his parents' behavior, so one day he wanted to apologize during recess. "Hey, I know they weren't very nice to you, but my grandmother's health always makes them nervous." I asked him what was wrong with his grandmother and why she wasn't in the hospital if she was sick. And he told me that she was in a coma for a long time and no one knew why. But his mother was taking good care of her. She sacrificed a lot for her, which is why sometimes she was so tired that her attitude was not appropriate. I felt bad for judging his parents so quickly. I had no idea of their problems. We forgot about the anger and became friends again. Jonan came to my house that weekend. We were playing ball when he said, "Hey, why don't you come over to my house to sleep? My parents are going out of town for work and won't be home until tomorrow afternoon. We can play video games all night." Despite having promised not to return to his house, I couldn't help it. I asked my parents for permission and lied to them, saying that Jonan's parents had invited me. I put some pajamas in the backpack and we both went to his house. We played in their backyard for an hour, and when the sun went down, we went inside. There were many cardboard boxes scattered on the kitchen floor. It had been a long time since they had moved in, but it seemed like they still had a lot to sort out. Jonan stood in front of a large closet. He opened it, and I found myself in a fantasy world. It was full of candy, sweets, and soft drinks. I grabbed all the candy I could and put them in my mouth. After filling our bellies, we went to his room and spent the rest of the night playing video games. I was having a great time. We played level after level. We had no homework or parents to tell us to go to bed. Hours passed when the clock in his room struck 9 and an alarm began to ring. "Oh, I almost forgot. It's time to feed Grandma," Jonan said. "Can you do it?" How could I do it if I didn't know that lady? "You just have to put the food tray near her bed and come back." Jonan insisted that I do it, saying that he was in the middle of a very important level. I had to accept because it would be my turn after him. He pointed to the tray of food on his desk. The entire house was silent. I stood in front of the narrow hallway with a tray of food in my hands, and a strange feeling began to grow in me. I walked slowly towards the door, and every time I took a step, the wooden floor creaked in an eerie way. I turned the doorknob silently and entered the room, illuminated by a red light that made me uneasy. There was a worn couch, a wooden table filled with medical supplies, and a bed in the right corner of the room. I had already seen that bed, and also the frail old woman lying in it. The beeping of a monitor mixed with Jonan's grandmother's heavy breathing, making me feel like I shouldn't be there. I got a little closer and could see her face well. Her eyes were closed and her breath created steam inside the oxygen mask. I put down the tray and turned to leave, but my hand accidentally hit a candlestick and fell to the floor with a loud bang. I picked it up immediately and my eyes turned to the bed again. This time she was awake. My friend's grandmother looked at me with big, scary eyes. Her thin body was trembling and an inaudible sound was emitted from her mouth. "I'm sorry, I didn't want to wake you up. Your grandson told me to bring you food." Suddenly, the woman got up from her bed and tore off the oxygen mask with a single pull. Then she grabbed my hand and pulled me closer to her face. She opened her mouth and, my God, her mouth! There was no tongue. Someone had cut it. She grabbed my neck and started strangling me like a maniac. I was sweating and drowning at the same time. There was no way to free myself from her strong grip. At that moment, the door opened and Jonan ran in. He started yelling at his grandmother as he tried to free me. He managed to get her hands off my neck and I fell to the ground gasping for air. He approached her and said, "Mom and Dad will be home soon. Finish your dinner and go to bed. You're sick. You need to rest." As Jonan continued to yell at her, I saw the burning hatred in his grandmother's eyes. She grabbed my friend by the neck and tore a piece of flesh from his cheek. He screamed in pain and I screamed in horror. I took him out of the room and we ran to his room and locked the door. We heard footsteps down the hallway that stopped near our door. Jonan shouted, "Grandma, what's wrong with you?" Suddenly, she started banging on the door. She not only hit the door with her fists, she also kicked it as if she had gone crazy. We called the emergency services, and when the police arrived and arrested her, the whole situation unfolded in an unexpected way. The tongueless woman was neither crazy nor Jonan's grandmother. She was the actual owner of the house who lived alone until my friend's parents broke in. Jonan's parents were thieves who had been on the run for the last few years. They made a plan to take refuge in the old woman's house, and all they had was stolen money. My friend's mother had cut out the poor woman's tongue so she couldn't scream for help. On the other hand, the father gave her sedatives every day to keep her unconscious. When the old woman saw Jonan and me, she considered us a threat and acted in self-defense. Jonan's parents were sent to prison while he was moved to a foster home. And what happened to me? I have not been able to overcome the trauma, and every time I close my eyes, I see the distorted face of that woman suffocating me. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it. And if you want to see more Draw My Life videos, subscribe to our channel. See you in the next episode.